really looking forward to the discussion. I want to thank everyone for being so engaged in our municipal election. It's exciting to know that people are paying attention to the school board trustee race, which of course is a very important aspect of the municipal election campaign that doesn't always get the same attention as the council races. So I'm really grateful to the candidates, all of you, for running, and to those who've attended this evening for joining us. My name is Emily Tamman. I'm a parent at Hopewell Public School. I've been a parent there for, I think I'm coming up on, I don't know, 12 years or something like that. Anyway, I've got a daughter in grade 11 now at Glebe and a son at Canterbury, and still one left in grade 6 at Hopewell. So proud part of this school community. And I really want to extend my gratitude to the organizers tonight, the Hopewell Parent Council, for making this happen, because this is really important, and I'm glad that you're all here. So what we're going to do this evening, this is, we're envisioning this as a relatively informal event. We're going to be giving the candidates an opportunity to introduce themselves. This is not a debate. This is a conversation that we're going to be having. And I'm going to be giving each of the candidates the floor for a maximum of 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less. It's up to you. I mean, the less time you spend on your initial comments, the more time we'll have for questions. But, you've each been allocated 10 minutes to start. The candidates will introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves and why they're running and what their priorities are should they be elected as trustees for the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And then we're going to move to the question and answer period of the evening. We have some questions that have been submitted in advance, and we will invite participants to submit additional questions through the chat, which will go to the organizers directly. In accordance with general practice, OCDSB policy, we just ask people to please keep this respectful. This is a harassment-free zone. Unfortunately, we've had to set it up due to some incidents that have occurred in the course of the campaign and before, so that when you ask your questions, they'll be coming directly to me and they won't be viewed by other attendees this evening. But we certainly do encourage questions. I also want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded and unsurrendered lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And coming as we are just off of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I think it's as important as ever, and in particular in our educational institutions, that we be mindful for those of us who are present as settlers on this land, of the long history since time immemorial of Indigenous peoples on this land, and to be mindful of that and bring that to everything that we do, but in particular events like this that involve public education. So with that being said, as I said, this is going to be a relatively informal thing. The candidates are going to speak. I'm then going to moderate a discussion. When we get to the question and answer, I would just ask the candidates again, like, we're not doing a very structured debate, so just to be mindful to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. And you'll forgive me if I interrupt and take the floor and pass it to someone else in the interests of ensuring that everyone is heard. I believe we're going to be hearing from the candidates in alphabetical order, and given the time that's been allocated to them, I'm just going to invite them to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about them. And so with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Neely Kaplan-Murth, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you very much, Emily, and good evening, everybody. Sorry if my puppy barks in the background. I'm not sure what to do about her, but we'll just try to ignore her. So my name is Dr. Neely Kaplan-Murth, and many of you know me from the neighborhood. I am a family doctor in Ottawa, and I've also raised my 3 children in Ottawa. They're 22, 19, and 12 now. So we've gone through First Ave much more, Lady Evelyn Glashan, and Glebe Collegiate as a family over the last many, many years. And some of you may know me from the Jabapalooza events and the outreach that I've done for the community throughout the pandemic. I've been a delegate to the Ottawa Carleton District School Board to talk about safety in schools. I went down to Queen's Park and advocated for children and educators last summer, and I've written a lot in Ottawa citizen. So you may know me from all of that. What you don't necessarily know is that I'm also an anthropologist. I'm a social scientist. Before medicine, I studied basically health and illness cross-culturally, and also vulnerable populations. And that has really been my life's work, has been, the puppy is so loud. That is what I've been doing throughout my career, is advocating for marginalized populations, advocating for people with disabilities, for Indigenous people, for raising awareness about racism and sexism and homophobia. As a family doctor, I have a large part of my practice that is also taking care of people who are transgender. So in this election, some people have asked me, well, why is this family doctor running to be school trustee? And really, it actually is very logical. I don't know what to do about the dog. It's very logical. It's an extension of all the other work that I've done. So working as a family physician, I spend my days advocating for children, and those are children who have ADHD, and they're children who are on the autism spectrum or other neurodiversities. They're children with dyslexia. They're children who live in poverty. They're children who have all kinds of issues and struggles that their families are facing. And I also advocate for their parents and for the community. So for me to step up and say that I will also do that as a school trustee is really to say, I'm not afraid to challenge the powers that be. I was asked to step up and run for this position because I am willing to say we need to do more. And as a physician, I have the deepest respect for my public health colleagues, but I also know that public health can't say that they're not allowed to do as much as they should. So I said, okay, well, I can advocate, and they've wanted me to advocate for these last almost 3 years. So basically, my platform is that, number one, education shouldn't be a privilege, that every child should have the opportunity and the supports to thrive in school. And that really isn't just about the pandemic at all. It's about celebrating diversity. It's that no student should ever face discrimination on the basis of culture or religion or language, gender identity, sexuality, physical disabilities, learning disabilities, or neurodiversity. And number two, safety shouldn't be a privilege. And again, that's not just with respect to COVID-19 or the pandemic, but it's safety in every respect. So as a physician, I'm often called upon to fill in forms for students who need EpiPens because they have a history of anaphylaxis, or I have to update that children have had all of their routine vaccines, or they'll be sent home from school. So we're talking about that, but we're also talking about safety in the streets. And I was approached, as probably the other candidates were as well, to talk about Hopewell and school streets projects and whether or not I would support that. And absolutely, I think having environmentally friendly and safe ways for people to actively get to school is really important. And that is a problem both at First Avenue and at Hopewell in terms of traffic along Bank Street and traffic along O'Connor. So we need to make sure that children can walk, roll, ride bikes to school safely. I also strongly believe that we need to have accountability in terms of the outcomes in schools. So the third principle that I'm really my platform is based on is one of equity and accountability and environmental and social responsibility. One thing that is true at all of our schools across Ottawa is that we have multiple programs. We have English programs, we have early French immersion, we have middle French immersion, we have gifted programs. All of these programs are run as though the outcomes are taken for granted. But I know as a parent who has watched children struggle in various different programs and who has seen significant gender disparities in high rates of attrition for little boys by the time you get to grade 6 in French immersion, high rates of attrition for children with ADHD and learning disabilities from French immersion programs, difficulties that children have faced in trying to get into gifted programs, and inequalities in who can access psych ed assessments and who can get into programs and who will have the supports that they need. I know that we need to do better at assessing and holding the Board of Education accountable for the outcomes for our children. There was the Read to Write inquiry by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And before the pandemic, there was a proposal put forward that there should be an assessment of whether or not that is being implemented across the board. That's specific to students with dyslexia and other disabilities that affect literacy. So we need to do that, but we need to do much more. We need to really look at what are the outcomes of our programs and how are decisions made about which schools will hold which programs. Now, I said this when I spoke to the Much More Parent Council, and I'll say it to you as well, which is that we are, by and large, a population in the Glebe, in Old Ottawa South, in Ottawa East. We are, by and large, quite privileged population. The Alta Vista population, which is also part of Zone 9, is not. And so I would strongly encourage Hopewell and First Ave to partner with those schools, because there are also inequities across the board in terms of what resources schools have, simple things like school libraries. And library technicians, educators, parents have reached out to me and said that we need to do something about that. There are schools in our city where they do not have books. And that's very different from the situation at First Ave, at Much More, at Hopewell, and it shouldn't be. And so we need, some of those schools don't even have parent councils. And so look at this amazing thing that you've put together tonight for First Ave and for Hopewell. Well, some of those schools, the parents haven't even been informed that they could be empowered to have parent councils. So I think that's also really important. And I think we have a role to play as people who are privileged to help other schools and other parents and other children. And the last thing that I'll say is, as a physician, I have been subject to a great deal of harassment. And as a Jewish woman, I have been subject to a great deal of anti-Semitism. And I know that discrimination is an issue across the board for people who are Jewish, for people who are Black, for people who are Asian, for people who are any racialized or minority population. I've also spoken with students who are non-binary and trans, and they are struggling because they don't have the supports that they need in schools. So I think that it is incumbent upon us to stand up for them. And I am horrified that there are people in Ottawa who are running on platforms of basically being unwoke. And I don't think that that's okay. I think you need to have some people within the board who will stand up to that kind of nonsense and say enough is enough. And I'm not saying that these other people, the other candidates tonight, are anything like that at all. But those are people who could potentially be elected in other wards and other zones. And that is what we might be up against at the board level. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I am happy if anybody wants to reach out to me on our website, which is nilikm.ca, so nilikm.ca. You can go to my website, and my email address is there, info@nilikm, and you can also request signs. And if you want to speak privately with me at any time, I'm happy to meet with you as well. And I'll turn it over to the next candidate.
Thank you. Impressive adherence to the time protocols, always appreciated by your moderator. I'm going to turn it over to Josh Rackless to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about why he's running.
Thanks. I liked how the doctor said, "Oh, you may know me from," kind of thing. So I'll try to do a "you may know me from." But I have not run Javapaloozas, but I've done a bunch of creative things. You may know me from playing a little mini-man in a commercial I wrote for Nutrigrain bars, or doing stand-up around town, or I wrote a love song for Green Party leader Elizabeth May that went viral 10 years ago. So I'm always doing creative things, and my career has mostly been working in advertising, writing commercials. So I'm good at marketing, good at branding, and I'd love to help brand our school board so that more people will want to attend it, and that way we'll get more money, more funding. I was in the gifted program myself, and one of my sisters went to Canterbury, and my other sister had some learning problems. And so I've seen, and I also took French immersion. So I've seen all sorts of different programs and how everybody has different learning abilities and skills and passions. And so I'd like to help all students achieve their potential, whether that's special needs programs, or maybe we could use even another arts high school like Canterbury, or maybe schools that have different specializations like science or business. I think it'd be great. because in my later years now, I'm realizing, oh, I wish there had been more programs for me to help me achieve my potential. I spent a lot of time after school just watching TV, and I look back on those years, I'm like, man, I wish somebody had sort of been able to channel my energies and my passions better, so that me and other people can be better prepared for life. I care about the environment, so that's a big thing for me as well. I've run for the Green Party a few times, and I've been trained by Al Gore as a climate leader. And in my life, I pick up litter everywhere I go. I used to hand flyers to cars I saw idling, saying, you shouldn't idle, you're wasting gas, you're polluting the environment. But people didn't like that. So I sort of focused my energies more on doing eco-comedy videos, like the Elizabeth May one, or I did a love song for Laurie David, who produced An Inconvenient Truth, that kind of thing. So I'm always looking for creative ways to spread positive messages and to make change. And I would bring that to my role as school trustee as well, always looking for creative ways of doing things that maybe other people hadn't thought of. What else did I want to talk about? Oh yeah, just at the debate the other day at the Glebe Community Center, a couple of students were volunteering there, and I said, oh, what are issues for you? And they were like, oh, at Glebe, it's always too hot. We don't have good air conditioning, and the toilets are never flushed. The bathrooms aren't clean. So even just things like that made me realize there's things we could do to make schools more comfortable and allow students to just focus on their learning. Like, we wouldn't tolerate an office for grownups where the bathrooms weren't clean or it wasn't properly air conditioned or heated or whatever. So we shouldn't tolerate that kind of thing for students as well. And along the green aspect, I'd love to see like green roofs on schools, more trees, more green space, because I know green space is good for mental health and physical health. And especially after the pandemic, where kids were dealing with masks and online learning and all of that, there's a lot of mental health problems. And I'd love to see more mental health help as well, counselors or therapists in schools. When I was at the meeting with the other candidates the other day at a school, and I realized, yeah, like we could use even a class like replacing one of the other subjects or something with something that would give kids maybe cognitive behavioral therapy or tools to deal with mental health and stress and tools for living. Because that's another thing I feel like maybe I missed out on during my school years. Like, you can learn history, you can learn math, a lot of stuff you might never use again, but if you don't have the tools to deal with stress and to just manage your mental health, that can affect everything in your life. So I'd love to see schools chipping in there and allocating resources to even like a counselor or a therapist that students could talk to like once a week to deal with their issues. And yeah, and just personally, like, I do a lot of social media. People recognize me from posting in Facebook neighborhoods or doing my YouTube videos, and I do a podcast. I was acting in a movie recently, and somebody's like, hey, your voice sounds familiar. Are you like the podcast guy? I'm like, yeah. So I didn't realize people are even listening that much, but I would love to do a podcast and YouTube videos just about school board issues to keep everybody informed, so that it's not just private meetings, or, I mean, they're not private meetings, but you might have trouble finding out what's going on. So I'd love to do a show just keeping people up to date on what I'm doing and what the board is doing, and to have anybody on as a guest. Even if I don't win, I'd love to have you all on my show as a guest, so we could talk as a community and solve problems together. And I feel like Emily is now on there because my time is up.
No, not at all. Actually, you still have time, but I just felt that you were winding down.
I was.
You don't have to use the full 10
no,
minutes,
no, you have a good sense of when somebody's rambling just to fill time. Yeah, that's good.
Well, you'll have lots of time to say more. Yeah. Go ahead and wrap up.
No, I'm done. Yeah, I'd love to just to hear questions, and I don't purport to be an expert on any of these things, so I'd love to hear more from parents and the community as to what their issues are, and then we can discuss that. And that's how I would act as trustee as well. I want to work with parents and hear from them as much as possible, and rather than me dictating things from the top down, I want to work with everyone and do what is best for you guys.
That's great. Thanks, Josh. As a fellow podcaster, I appreciate hearing that you want to incorporate podcasting. And I've also been voice recognized before. So that's a very, very, very strange thing to have happen. But when you have a face for radio,
exactly
what happened. Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to pass the floor over to Jessie Lee Wallace. Jessie Lee, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thanks to Petra and Alex and to the Hopewell Parent Council for inviting me. So I'll just start out by saying I'm a little nervous. I don't love public speaking, which is hilarious that I'm running for office. But anyways, that's another story for another day. So I want to tell you a little bit about me so you understand why I'm running, because I think that's really important, the motivation to run. So I'm a parent. My daughter, Mimi, is in the next room. And I'll tell you a little bit about my work in a second, but I wanted to tell you about you know, education for me and why that matters and why public education matters. So I was raised by a solo parent, and, you know, we really didn't have much. I was a recipient of Ontario Works, and, you know, education was my great equalizer. And today I live in the Glebe Annex and with my husband and my daughter, and I work for the Boys and Girls Club. And we serve about 5,000 children and youth every year, and primarily racialized youth, so African, Caribbean, and Black youth, and also New Canadian youth. So that's my day job. And I also want to state that we actually do have a lot of poverty in Capital Ward. And maybe it's hidden poverty or it's not as known, but there's so many kids that go to much more, where my daughter goes, and Hopewell, that would be considered working poor, but maybe it's just not as a parent. So I do want to state that. And I work in the communities of Herongate and Hetherington and Alta Vista, all over Russell, because, you know, we work in 19 plus neighborhoods across the city. And these communities are vibrant and thriving, and they could use help, but not necessarily help from other communities. Perhaps they could use help by supporting their own initiatives. And so I think that's really important to recognize the vibrancy of communities that are across the city and that are doing incredible things. So coming back to my platform and me, so I've been doing community development work for about 15 years and focused on education and children and youth, but also affordable housing. And my last gig, I was at Cornerstone Housing for Women for 3 years, and I built affordable housing for women that had been unhoused or living in emergency shelter. So the pandemic is what made me run for school board trustee. I never really thought, to be honest, a lot about what a school board trustee does until the pandemic. And I realized the impact that these decisions, critical decisions, make on our day-to-day lives. And I also saw a lot of families struggle in the pandemic. At my work, the children that we serve, my own daughter, my neighbors. And for me, you know, I don't want us to lose a whole generation, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, one of the candidates mentioned Right to Read, or the Ontario Human Rights Commission's report that came out earlier this year. So the OCDSB is actually doing a lot to implement some of those, you know, requirements, or I should say recommendations already. There was 157 recommendations that came out of that report, because when we look at grade sixers, and this was from 2018, you know, roughly 1 in 6 weren't meeting literacy standards. Grade 3 was roughly 1 in 4. And it was diverse learners. It was many different types of learners with other abilities, but it was around structured literacy is what we need. And so what I really want to focus on is closing the learning gap from the last 2.5 years, and also the social and emotional, but especially the scholastic learning gap. And that may be something weird to say from a trustee perspective, because a school board trustee is good governance, policies and procedures, working together as one of 12 trustees to ensure that we move an agenda forward, right? And so you don't work by yourself. And you need to ensure that you actually don't manage staff. You only have one staff that you manage, which is the Director of Education directly manage, and that's through good governance. And so what I would want to see is really providing supportive and timely reports to parents. And also, I'd want to improve communication with parents who are seeking help for their learners and for learners themselves, like systems navigation. I would also want to see screening every student at least twice a year from kindergarten to grade 2. We can do that at the school board level. We can centralize resources. We can ensure that that happens. And I'm also very committed to equity, as you can see through my day job. You know, my child is also biracial. And so we have lived experience of, you know, certain things as well that I think is important to note. You know, the thing I would want to leave you with is this. The next 4 years are going to be tough in some ways because we have potentially a significant amount of budget cuts. We need to have a united front. We need to ensure that we, as trustees, as a board, allocate our resources effectively to support all children as they move forward. And that also includes, of course, gifted kids and kids who need enrichment, but that also includes a significant amount of children that have suffered over the last couple of years. So I hope that gives you a little bit about me. I appreciate your time tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessie Lee. This is, I think we're starting the evening off well with great substantive ideas from our candidates. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just invite the candidates to unmute themselves, because I prefer to kind of be relatively organic about how we do this. I think it's better than just like, you have 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes kind of thing. And some of these are relatively short questions, so you can kind of measure the length of your answer accordingly. These questions were submitted in advance, and I'm just going to, before I jump right into them, ask our admins here. I haven't seen any other questions. I know that I can see them and maybe participants can't, but perhaps someone can email me or send me a note just to let me know if there are additional questions that I should be aware of, but we have several to get us started. So the first question is, this is a Hopewell parent who's inquiring what the candidate's stance is on community or triple track schools. And this parent is also inquiring about what you would do to enhance English programs within these schools. So maybe just to get us started, we'll go in reverse order. So Jessie Lee, I'll turn the floor over to you for an answer, and then Josh and Nili.
So that's a great question. I know that there's been wonderful success with triple track schools. There's a few examples. Weirdly, the one that's popping to mind is the Barhaven Public School. I don't know why that one's coming to mind, but anyways. So I think, like, I know some students do better with early French immersion. Some do better with kind of that midpoint entry, almost at the grade 4 level. And then also some really need more of a streamlined approach. And to give students more choice, along with almost like a self-led learning approach, I think is a benefit. Personally, I think that's a really good thing. And if the staffing model and the allocation model can support it, that is also key. So from a trustee standpoint, that allocation is really, really important, and as well as the boundary and the program offerings, right, to complement that. And so I guess I'm pro, you know, as long as the allocation can support it. The other part of it is, from an enrichment standpoint, I think there's a lot of things at the school level, the hyper local level, that can be done from English enrichment. It doesn't always have to be staffing. And so I know when I was growing up, I was a voracious reader, and we had reading clubs and we had Chaucer Club. It's kind of dorky, but that's what we did. And you know what? That type of peer-led approach was like my everything. And so I know that type of work is already happening in schools. But unfortunately, due to the pandemic, a lot has kind of eroded. So that is something that could definitely happen again. Now, at a school board trustee level, though, that's not necessarily something that we would enact. We can encourage and we can cheerlead, because from a policy and procedure standpoint, that's really a staff-led exercise. So I think it's sometimes really important to understand what the roles are as well. I hope that answers your question.
That's a great point, Jessie Lee. And yes, I think that does answer the question. Josh, do you have any thoughts about triple track schools?
Not really. You know, I mean, it sounds like a good idea. I don't know if there's, you know, well-known pros and cons, but I attended French immersion. It was sort of an experiment at John Fisher Public School in Toronto, and then each year they added.
I went to John Fisher too.
Oh my
I went
gosh.
to John Fisher also. Sorry, that's very, and so did my neighbor 2 doors down. Anyway, carry on. That's
no, this is interesting. We keep finding more similarities. Why don't we know each other? And yeah, I think by the end when I graduated, it was like all French immersion. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like a good idea to have definitely different streams and tracks because everybody has different skills. Not everybody can do French immersion. Not everybody's gifted or whatever the different tracks are. Yeah, and I just realized, you know, I spent all that time doing French immersion for like 20 years and I've never used my French since. So I start to wonder what is the point of these things? But yeah, there's, you know, whatever we can do to give people, you know, a track that's best suited for them seems like a good idea. But I'd love to hear if people are sort of opposed to it for a certain reason so I can sort of explore the issue more.
All right, Nili.
So as I had said before, like I think we have to make sure that we are accountable in terms of outcomes for these different tracks. And so we do have, I think, some data that shows that whether children start French immersion in middle immersion or they start earlier, by the time they get to high school, their French fluency is pretty much equivalent. If we don't have middle immersion, then we have basically prevented new Canadians or others who've just arrived from being able to join a French immersion stream. There are also some children who, for many different reasons, aren't ready for French immersion at the very start of kindergarten, or at this point, it's kind of grade 1 when they really start in French immersion, but they're not ready for it at the very beginning, and having a later start is important. But again, to reiterate that we need to make sure that there aren't any ways in which children are being disadvantaged. And I'll give an example, which is that for a long time now, when First Ave used to be the French immersion school and much more was the English school, it was this way, and now it's swapped. But because of the high attrition rate of boys in French immersion, what was happening until, you know, my children anyway were out of school, and it's still happening to my patients who are in schools, and this happens at Lady Evelyn because it's an alternative school, is that you end up with many children who actually need special education and who need special supports who end up in the English program. And so the English program can become very burdened. Not to say that these children are a burden, but the programs themselves are stuck with under resourced classrooms where what they really need is they need support staff, they need EAs, they need people who have special education training in order to help these students to navigate through elementary school. So that is a distinct difference between English versus French immersion, whether it's early French or middle French immersion. By not addressing it, what we're doing is we're ending up with these classrooms where you have 20 little boys in a classroom and 3 little girls, and 3/4 of those little boys have ADHD. And some of those kids have learning disabilities, and some of those kids are gifted, and some of those kids have other needs, and none of those are being met. So I know I saw that a question popped up in the thing about gifted education, but this really is a good segue into that, because by de-streaming, which is what is really a provincial thing, this isn't up to the Board of Education, this is a provincial Ministry of Education thing, but by de-streaming, what they're doing is taking away resources from those same kids, and they're teaching to some common denominator that does not address different children's needs. So yes, we need to have English as an option. We need to have middle immersion as an option. We need to have early immersion as an option. But we also need to ensure that the kids in those programs are getting the actual supports they need, and that it isn't just a dumping ground where French immersion teachers are saying, I don't think your little boy should be in our class anymore. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, no, those are all excellent points. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm just going to ask the candidates to try to slightly streamline your answers a little bit so we can get more questions in. This question is for all the candidates. Where do you stand on policing in schools, and how does white supremacy relate to this position? Josh, why don't you go first this time?
I mean, it's nothing's a black and white issue. I think, I mean, if police are needed, they can be helpful. I don't see police as a inherent evil. I would assume that they're not racist and they're just doing their jobs. And so from what I've heard in the news and such, you know, often it can be useful to have a police officer that's there to keep people safe and there's a resource for people. You know, obviously if there's a white supremacist police or something like that, that's not a good thing, but I'm not necessarily against it. I know a lot of people feel like it's oppressive to minorities and stuff. I need to learn more about whether that's the case. So yeah, I mean, if there's a reason that police are there to keep people safe, and I would support that.
Jessie Lee.
Well, okay. So we've been told over the last couple years, especially, but generally by those people that identify as Black, Indigenous, to us LGBTQ+, that they don't feel safe very often having police representatives right in school, that they don't feel okay going to class. And, you know, there were delegations over the last year and a half, specifically at the school board level. And so that is why the board removed, in effect, school resource police officers. And they removed them, in effect, not to say that police won't serve schools, and that does happen, but they removed them because they listened to this testimony by racialized people that were unsafe because there was policing in schools. Now, I will add that I don't feel like right now, and based on the data and everything that is happening in certain key schools especially, that there are enough wraparound supports to support parents, families, and administration right now so that students do feel safe. So that is a significant issue, but policing isn't necessarily the right issue in that circumstance. So it has to be more nuanced, but I would say overall, I support the decision of the board. And I would want to work collectively to ensure that all students have the resources they need to be safe.
Thank you. Millie.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Jessie Lee, and I'm not sure if that's also what Josh said, but I think that the position taken by the board of removing resource officers from schools is really important. The people who are most vulnerable are also the people who do not have a sense of safety when police are around. What we need, and we talked about this at much more as well when we spoke there last week, what we need is to have social workers. We need to have people who are trained to deal with conflict in a way that doesn't bring police into schools. And unfortunately, it's been really enlightening to receive emails and letters from people asking for all kinds of opinions on things like this. But one person who apparently wrote something in Ottawa Citizen about why we should really have more police in schools, you know, was kind of arguing that, well, people who come to Canada and don't feel comfortable with police should just learn that police are okay. And that's just simply not true. And it's just a total misunderstanding of people's experiences, people of color, Indigenous people, people who are LGBTQ, and Jews and women, and anybody who has experienced trauma knows that it is not really the place that you go for safety. But schools have to be safe spaces, and teachers and school principals and vice principals and the school board has to be committed to ensuring non-discriminatory rules within schools. And when there are instances where police have to be involved, that doesn't mean that you need to have a resource officer in a school. That needs to take place in a different way. So the short answer is it's inappropriate to have police in schools as resource officers.
Thank you so much. Okay, this next question, I've taken a couple of related questions and just kind of incorporated them into a single question. So if you're listening and you don't feel that your question has been asked verbatim the way you ask it, that's why. This question is about public health measures in schools. This is obviously a contentious issue for many parents. And so I'm asking the candidates, it's a multi-part question, I guess. So where do you stand on mask mandates in schools? Would you advocate for measures beyond what Ottawa Public Health implements? And if you do favor a mask mandate, if you could talk about what that looks like for you. So would it apply in all spaces? Would it interfere with extracurricular activities? Would there be consequences for non-compliance? So if you could just talk to us a little bit. If your answer is that no, you don't support a mask mandate and you'd like to explain why, you can go ahead and do that. And if you are in favor of some form of a mask mandate, you're being asked to, again, would you do so contrary to Ottawa Public Health guidelines? And what would it look like? What would you be advocating for? And in this case, we'll start with Nili, and then we'll go to Josh and Jessie.
Yeah. So what I said before is what I stand by, which is that we need to go above and beyond. And public health knows that too, and they say that to us as physicians, but they can't go against what Ontario says. The Conservative government in Ontario has made it very clear that they will not bring masks back. They will not mandate any even isolation for people who are sick with COVID. And so as a physician, my answer to that is that we should be taking care of each other. And as a physician, I said this last week as well, we have a responsibility to ensure that everybody, and that includes my patients who just recovered from treatment for cancer. It includes my patients who have little baby siblings at home, and it includes my patients who have immunocompromised parents or grandparents. Everybody needs to be able to go to school and to have an education that is safe. And that means we should be doing all these things. So it's not just about masks. We should have improved ventilation. We should have HEPA filters in every classroom. We should be able to still report like we do for every other disease. If lice is detected in your children's hair, your child is sent home. But if COVID is known in that child, and that child is still allowed to go to class the next day, or the teacher is allowed to go back to work 2 days later, and they're going back to work or going back to school without masks, then what that means for everybody is that people are being reinfected. And my patients are literally on their 3rd and 4th infections, and this is a disease that can have long-term consequences. So absolutely, if we don't require masks, then people won't wear masks. But even as the principal of Muchmore acknowledged to us last week, the children had no difficulty wearing masks. In fact, most Canadians were very happy to do what was asked of them when we had clear guidelines saying, this is why you're going to do it, and we should all step up and we should do this together. So it is not an infringement on anybody's rights. It does not in any way affect anybody's education or quality of life for people to wear masks. When I delegated last year to the OCDSB and also to other school boards to talk about the importance of teachers being able to wear better masks, we had donated N95 masks that we distributed to schools around Ottawa to children who needed it through the food bank and through other locations where we knew that we could access children who are struggling and wouldn't necessarily be able to buy masks. The truth is, and I can tell you, and I think you already know, they're not going to be mandated again. They're just simply not. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be advocating for it. And the reason we're advocating for it is also because CHEO is overrun. The respiratory illnesses that are going around right now, in addition to COVID, are going to mean more children are sick, more staff are sick, and they bring those home to their parents, and then more doctors and nurses are sick, and more grocers are sick, and more families are struggling, and people are also going to deal with long COVID, which is a disability that is not going to be adequately supported by our province. So yes, we should be doing more, and we should be doing everything that public health says, but also public health wants us to be doing more, and they can't say it, but we can. And we did manage to get the OCDSB to bring back masks, even temporarily. And there is very good evidence from around the world that masks prevent, they significantly reduced transmission in schools that kept mask mandates last spring when others dropped them. Those schools had significantly lower rates of transmission of COVID. The argument
I'm just
going to say one more thing, which is really important, which is because everybody's going to say, well, but we don't mask outside of school, so why should we mask in school? We should be masking anywhere where we're indoors. And that's really up to each of you to do, to take care of other people.
And just before we move on, if I can just ask you to clarify one thing, is so because there was a direct question on this. So when you say the province isn't going to bring it back, but we need to advocate for it, is that to say that if you're elected trustee, you would bring a motion or advocate for a mask mandate, or just advocate for greater mask wearing in the schools? And I'm just asking you that because that was asked.
So the OCDSB is capable of mandating masks, even if the province won't. And we've seen that in other educational institutions, like, for example, universities all around the world. And so while Ontario as a province isn't going to do it, Ottawa was a leader last year when we did. And isn't that great? Like, that's something to celebrate. That is pretty awesome. So I'm not the only person who would speak up for it. I was asked to speak. I was asked to run because I would be willing to say, look, here's the science, here's the medicine, here are the reasons we need to take care of everybody. And it's not just up to those vulnerable children or vulnerable staff, because that's not how masking works. It really has to be that everybody's masked.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Josh.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big emotional issue. So anything I say, people are going to get upset about. And I'm not
that's politics, baby. People are entitled to know where you stand.
That's true. And, you know, I'm not a doctor. I'm not on the front lines like Dr. Nilly is. And so, you know, I can't look at it from the same perspective. You know, I am a man of science and logic, so I would want to hear all issues. I haven't, or, you know, all facts. I haven't, I'm not familiar with the studies that showed that masking in schools did affect things. So that would be good to look at. I guess just in general, I try to see all sides of any issue. Like, you know, for example, the police issue, it's like, well, what are the reasons that police would be needed? What are the reasons that they would not be wanted? So I don't tend to have like one sort of religious view on one side, for better or for worse. So in terms of masks, yeah, if they work, that, I mean, obviously in a perfect world, if we could prevent COVID from spreading 100% with no negative side effects of the, you know, the procedures, then we should do that. But everything has pros and cons. So, you know, we'd want to look at how much do masks actually work versus what are the downsides of it? Like, is it causing developmental difficulties in children because they can't see faces for 2 years? Does it make it almost impossible to learn if you've got an N95 mask on all the time? You look at, you know, the statistics on, you know, from what I've read, and this is all just, you know, me looking at the news or whatever, like COVID more affects adults and elderly people. It's not as dangerous for children. So do we weigh that factor in versus, you know, what are the psychological damage caused by masks and everything? So I'm not saying I'm for the mask mandate or against it. I'm just saying everything, again, isn't black and white. There's pros and cons for each thing. So I'd be open to look at trying to come up with some kind of balance that would overall be best for physical health, be best for learning, be best for mental health, and try to hopefully find, you know, something that works as good as it can, because no solution is going to be absolutely perfect. So that's kind of where I am.
Thank you. Jessie Lee.
So I'll start by saying, you know, when the pandemic hit, I was working in an emergency women's shelter, and I had a mask on and, you know, the clear visor, scrubs, gloves, you know, and there was so much fear, right? And it was awful. It was full awful. And a lot of people got sick, and it was terrible. And, you know, over time we received a vaccine, right? And, you know, we've been living, you know, with this now for 2.5 years, and it's been so difficult for so many people. And masking was a way that we could take care of each other. And so I think for me right now at this point, you know, I stand with Vera. I always stand with Ottawa Public Health. And I want our children and youth to get back to living as normal life as possible, if possible. I still mask when I'm inside. You know, when I'm going canvassing, I put a mask on when I'm in an apartment building. You know, I encourage masking.
Sorry, you didn't mask when we were inside last week, right?
I would like to continue, please.
You did.
And so what I would like to say though is for children and youth, you know, I want them to have extracurriculars. I want them to be able to play basketball. I want them to have music class. I want them to be able to sing in the choir. I want them to have all of those things. And so I think at this point, you know, just to emphasize that I do not support a mask mandate.
Okay, well, that was a good discussion, and there's no question it's a contentious issue with very strongly held views on all sides, and that was borne out in the framing of the questions as well. I can tell you there were, there's those who want them and there's those who don't, and we see those views reflected here tonight as well. So I know for many parents this will be an important issue in the election. Okay, I have what I would describe as like a quick and dirty question. So I would just ask you to it's basically a yes or no question. And the question is, do your children presently attend private school or public school if you have children? And have you ever sent your children to private school? Neely, we'll hear from you first.
So actually, I think that it's inappropriate to be asking us what school our children go to. And because I am somebody who is receiving death threats, I'm not going to talk about where my children currently go. I can tell you that one of the things that happened to my eldest when he was in high school was that he couldn't navigate his way around Glebe Collegiate. He couldn't get the supports that he needed as a child with learning disabilities and a child who was gifted and a child who had extreme anxiety. And in order for him to complete high school, we had to put him at another school in order to get him the supports he needed. He needed one-on-one teaching. And I can tell you that as a parent, when I started off parenting, I had no money. I was a student who had to basically take hand-me-down snowsuits and boots because I was living from paycheck to paycheck. And I am not comfortable with the fact that when our children struggle, it basically ends up being that those children who have access to funds end up getting the supports that they need. My son would not have gotten through high school. His teachers told him that you might be gifted, but you're not picking up a pencil. You're not going to be able to do the work, and your kid's going to fail, is what we were told. And I mean, we had to even at that time we had to borrow from family members and just kind of, you know, suck it up and send him where he could get one-on-one education. And that should never have happened. And I am all the time advocating for my patients who can't do that and whose children are falling through the cracks and are not able to get the supports they need. So if anybody knows me, they know that I am a huge advocate for public health and public education, and our province is not. And I'm very, very concerned about all the ways in which we end up basically, and it happens in health and it happens in education, but we end up with private learning pods that start when the pandemic starts because those people who can afford it ended up, you know, hiring tutors, and the rest of the kids just don't have that kind of support and resource. Yeah. So
okay. I'll leave it I'm going to stop you there. I mean, I don't think it's an unfair question. No one's asking you specifically which school your children attend. And I think, you know, you've given an explanation and you're certainly welcome to do that. I think, you know, there's many reasons why people make the choices that they do for their children. I think people just want to understand, and you've made it clear that you support public education. Jessie Lee.
So my daughter actually went to Hopewell for kindergarten and for K5. I'm messing it up, and then is now at Much. And so it's a great community, and we're fortunate that they're two like top shelf schools. And I know that there's always room for improvement, and there's so much that can be done. But those are the two ones that she went to.
Okay, Josh. I do not have children, so they are not attending anything. But you know, I can understand the desire, if people can afford it, to, you know, to pursue the best education for their children. So I would want to make sure our, you know, the public school board is as good as possible so that people wouldn't even want to go to a private school. And again, the more students we have in the board, the more funding they get. So we want to try to get everybody in the public board. And so, yeah.
Okay. Okay, this next question will go to Josh and then Nili and Jessie Lee. And the question is, and we just have a couple minutes left here. What is your opinion / forecast / support for possible disruptions related to teachers unions and teacher strikes and actions in this negotiations year? And this is a timely question, given that we saw today that CUPE education workers have voted overwhelmingly in support of a strike action. So what do you think is going to happen in terms of labor disruptions and actions in this negotiations year? Josh.
I mean, just in general, I would hope that we could do whatever's best for kids, right? Teachers can go on strike and it's not going to affect their, future development and learning and their life. But if kids miss out on months or a year, that's, delays that they could never get back. So I would want to work with the unions to do whatever we can to keep teachers teaching and resolve the grown-up issues outside of that.
Okay, Nili?
So I'm not sure exactly what the board trustee roles would be in relation to a strike. And I have always, as a parent, supported teachers striking because I think it's really important that we respect the work that they do. And while that may not be what the board would officially want to endorse, I think absolutely we have to support teachers. We have to ensure that the people who are with our children every day are being treated well. And yes, of course, we don't want our children to miss more school, but we also, our commitment is to the entire community. And if teachers decide that what they need to do is strike, then all the power to them. That's what they should be doing. And as parents, I think that many of us would be in support and bringing hot chocolate and coffee to those teachers.
Well, I know it was very cold last time they were out, so I remember that very well. Jessie Lee.
So I was chatting the other day with 2 retired teachers, and one of which used to be the liaison to the union. And I asked this question actually. So what can we do at the school board trustee level during these negotiations, which in effect is actually with the province, right? And so the only thing that we can do is form in some ways a united front in camera at the school board meeting to ensure that we are getting all the information we can and advocating and applying pressure early enough with the province and the provincial representatives so that ideally the teachers get what they need in a collective bargaining situation and our students get to keep learning. And so I will always err on the side of unions because I came from a union family. My stepdad was in union for 30 years. It's kind of just what happens. And I also deeply appreciate the work of teachers. It's hard. And also we have other unionized folks too. We have our administration. We have, I think like 3 other, so there's 3 other unions that are also kind of in the mix, right? So all that to say, I don't want students to have a disrupted learning year. I want my daughter to keep going to school. But from a school board trustee level, that's what I could do is to really organize, advocate, and apply pressure, but in camera, because you need to ensure that you are not being out of bounds because there are certain constraints you have.
Okay, thank you. We're just about out of time. There's just one last question that was submitted in advance that I'm going to ask, and then we're going to wrap up for the evening. So this question will go to Jessie Lee, and then Josh, and then Nili. And the question is, do you have any ideas on how to strengthen public schooling versus the Ontario government pushing privatization? And what would you want OCDSB to take on in this regard? How can we increase funding and political commitment towards public education? I think this is a great question to end the evening on. Jessie Lee.
Well, one thing I learned, because I really didn't know what I was getting into when I ran for trustee, is that a lot of folks don't realize how to designate their tax dollars to the public education system. And it is such a fundamental thing. So that is one thing, just a note. The other thing I think honestly is we need to systemically approach the right to read and navigating the system so that it is better for more learners and more families so they stay in the education systems. And so if we use an evidence-based structured literacy and numeracy approach that is being recommended, we will strengthen our public education system. And there's many different ways we can do that, from very small to very large. And so there's also other ways that we can go about it, but I think I'll end that there. But definitely money, reallocation of funds, and ensuring that, you know, we support all learners. Okay, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of been the theme of the night. Like, how can we make the school board as strong and good for students as possible so that people don't need to flee to private schools? And we should be able to do it. I mean, if the government's funding the public board, we've got the most money, and we should be able to allocate it smartly. And it only benefits everybody in society if all students, regardless of how much money their family has, can get the best education and achieve their potential. So we definitely need to make that happen. I don't think people, we definitely shouldn't have people thinking, oh, I've got to go to a private school to get the best education or to feel safe or whatever the issues are.
Okay, and Nili?
So I think that the answer of what we can do to help to advocate for public education is reaching out to our MPPs, speaking publicly about the issues that arise in our schools and across the school board. And it's not just about like I said, dollars spent in education on a large level, but it's also about the inequalities from one school to another. And different school boards in Ontario do different things with their money. So in the Toronto District School Board, they give a certain amount to every school library based on the per capita number of students at that school. In Ottawa, they don't. In looking at things like we don't have school psychologists, we don't have school nurses, we don't have people, again, able to access psych ed assessments. There's a lot of things that are basically offloaded to the private system that used to be provided in the public system and should be provided for us to truly have an equitable system. So I think we need to look at all of those things, and parents know that, teachers know that, EAs know that. Like, I think that there needs to be a lot more conversation and involvement of educators in these kinds of conversations, because they know who falls through the cracks. They know, and we all know, that we didn't used to have to buy all the school supplies. When we were kids, all the crayons and all the school supplies, they were all there. My mom was a teacher. They were all there. We would go in August and set up the classroom, and that was provided by the Ministry of Health or by the Ministry of Education, and it is no longer. Now everything is offloaded. So all of these insidious ways in which privatization has slipped into education, they can be reversed, they can be addressed, but first you have to call it out. You have to say that these things aren't okay. And then you have to get your leaders involved, and that includes your city councilors, it includes your MPPs, and it includes the Board of Education, and then it includes also going to the Minister of Education.
Thank you so much. Well, listen, it's 8:03. I pride myself as a moderator and keep running a tight ship, and I'm very pleased that we've really kept it within the hour. I just want to really thank all three of the candidates for putting your names forward. I know it's not easy. I've been a candidate myself, and it's a lot of work, and we appreciate your commitment to public service, and we're grateful that you made yourselves available to us this evening to answer tough questions. Our public schools are facing a lot of challenges. I think there's no question about that. The pandemic certainly hasn't made things any easier for any of us, but certainly not for our kids and our education workers. And I just want to say, you know, I think we'll be in good hands. We've got we're used to in Capital Ward and Alta Vista to having a gluttony of riches when it comes to our candidates. So thank you all so much for all of your good work. I also just want to mention, because a couple people have asked me this, some people have asked about our previous trustee, Lyra Evans, And some of you may not know that the zones were redistributed. So every school board zone consists of 2 municipal wards, and Lyra's ward was redistributed. So she is in fact running again, but she's running in a newly constituted ward. And so here we have brand new candidates to share their vision for the future of the Ottawa Carleton District School Board with us. And thank you so much again to all of the people who joined us today. I'm sorry we couldn't quite get to all the questions, but we actually got through most of them. And I'm sure you can find these candidates and you'll be able to direct any additional questions to them between now and Election Day. Please make sure to vote if you haven't already. Thank you again very much to the Hopewell Parent Council, Petra, Alex, for organizing this evening, a really thoughtful discussion, and I was really grateful to have been a part of it. So thanks everyone, and have a great night.
And thanks Emily, to you for wonderful moderation. If anyone wants to have the recording, let us know. We will be able to provide you the recording. So thanks to all of you very much for your time and taking on the questions, and a good evening, everyone. See you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.